A 76-year-old pastor sat alone in an empty church with a loaded shotgun across his knees and a suicide note in his pocket. He had already picked the date, Easter last sermon, then a single pull of the trigger. But that night, 123 members of a motorcycle gang that the FBI called one of the most dangerous in America knocked on his door. They were freezing to death. He had every reason to turn them away. What he did instead would force CNN to interrupt their broadcast 6 weeks later. What 5,000 bikers did in return would make grown men weep on national television. And the secret that the pastor whispered to the gang leader at 3 a.m, the confession that neither man ever expected to share, would bind two sworn enemies together until death. This is the true story of the night that changed everything. The temperature dropped 23 degrees in 40 minutes. Nobody saw it coming. The National Weather Service had predicted light flurries, maybe an inch of accumulation. But nature does not read forecasts. Nature kills when it wants to kill. 123 motorcycles roared through the Oklahoma darkness, their headlights cutting weak tunnels through thickening snow. They rode in tight formation, the way brotherhood demanded. Chrome glinted beneath ice forming on handlebars. Leather jackets crackled with frost. Darrell Sledgehammer Sloan was doing math that did not add up. 18 miles to the nearest town, fuel gauges dropping, 7 brothers already showing signs of hypothermia. Pete Weaver, 20 years old, had nearly dumped his bike twice in the last 4 minutes. His reflexes were sluggish, his fingers too numb to grip the throttle. They were coming home from a funeral. Deacon Williams, 22 years old, a wife 7 months pregnant, a future erased when a SWAT team hit the wrong house at 3 a.m, and a nervous rookie put 4 bullets into a man reaching for his phone. Now his brothers were riding through a storm that wanted to finish the job. "Sledgehammer, we gotta stop." The voice crackled through the radio. It was Tommy Raines, sergeant-at-arms, riding near the back. "Pete is fading. He's gonna go down." Darrell scanned the white void ahead. Gas stations, motels, even a barn would do. Anything with walls and a roof. Nothing. Just snow and darkness and the terrible knowledge that he was leading 122 people toward a death that would make the evening news. They would find the bodies in spring, frozen solid by the roadside. The headlines would read, "Outlaw motorcycle gang found dead after reckless winter ride." Nobody would mention Deacon. Nobody would mention the pregnant widow in the van 14 miles behind them, the van with the dead engine and no cell service. "Listen up." Darrell's voice cut through static. "Anyone sees anything, a light, a building, a goddamn outhouse, you call it. We are not dying out here." Silence, wind howling, engines fighting against fuel turning to slush. Then a voice broke through. "Sledgehammer. I see something. Half-mile ahead, looks like a church steeple." Darrell squinted through ice on his visor. At first, nothing. Then a shape emerged from white chaos. A dark triangle pointing at the sky, topped by what might have been a cross. A church. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm trying to kill them. Darrell Sloan had stopped believing in God around the same time his father's fists stopped feeling like discipline. But staring at that distant steeple, he felt something he had not felt in 30 years. Hope. All units. New heading. Follow me. 123 motorcycles turned as one. Their headlights swept across the snow like searchlights, all pointed at a small church in a small town that most maps had already forgotten. They did not know it yet. They were riding toward the man who would save their lives. And they would spend the next 6 weeks figuring out how to save his. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Reverend Walter Benjamin Crow sat in the third pew of Elkhart Community Church with a loaded shotgun across his knees. He was not afraid of intruders. At 76 years old, fear had become a luxury he could not afford. The gun was not for protection. The gun was for a decision he had been circling for 3 months. The church was cold. He had stopped paying the heating bill in January, right around the time the bank sent its 4th notice about the $280,000 debt hanging over the building like a guillotine. Electricity still worked, barely. A single lamp near the altar cast weak yellow light across empty pews. Outside, The storm screamed against windows. Walter listened without interest. Storms came and went. His storm, the one raging inside him for 3 years, showed no signs of passing. Wife, son, grandson, 3 years, 3 funerals. One man left standing in the wreckage. Caroline went first. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to death. She made him promise things he was not sure he could keep. Stay strong. Keep the faith. Remember that God has a plan. He held her hand and lied, because what else do you do when the woman you have loved for 51 years is slipping away? Michael went next. His only child. A police officer in Oklahoma City, shot twice in the chest responding to a domestic disturbance, 47 years old. David went last. His grandson, Caroline's eyes, Michael's stubborn chin, heroin overdose, 23 years old, needle in his arm in a gas station bathroom. Walter identified the body, saw those eyes staring at nothing, felt something break inside him that would never heal. The bank would take the church in 72 hours, $280,000 that Walter did not have and could not raise. The congregation had dwindled to 8 people, all elderly, all on fixed incomes. He had made his peace with that. The church would go, and when it went, so would he. Easter Sunday. One final service, words he no longer believed. Then the shotgun. The note was written, brief, apologetic, not about despair but about completion. A man who had run out of road. He was thinking about the wording when he heard the sound. At first, he thought it was the storm, a strange harmonic in the wind. But it grew louder, more distinct, unmistakably mechanical, engines, dozens of them, maybe more. Walter set the shotgun aside and walked to the window. Through frost-covered glass, he saw lights, not car headlights, something different, a constellation of smaller beams bobbing and weaving through snow, motorcycles, in this weather. The sound grew until the church itself vibrated. Walter counted lights as they turned into the parking lot, gave up around 40, watched as dark figures began dismounting from machines more ice than chrome. Then came the knock. 3 heavy blows against the wooden door, each one echoing through the empty church like a gunshot. Walter looked at the shotgun, then at the door, then at the shotgun again. Not yet, he thought. Just let me see who is at the door. He opened it. The man on the porch looked like death had been chasing him and was gaining ground. Ice crystals clung to his beard like tiny diamonds. His leather jacket was frozen stiff, cracking as he shifted weight. His lips were blue. Not pale blue of mild cold, deep arterial blue that meant his body was shutting down. Behind him, stretching into the white void, 122 shadows stood motionless, some hunched over, some holding others upright. One figure near the back was not standing at all. 2 people carried him between them, boots dragging through snow. The man spoke first, voice like gravel scraping bone. Name is Darrell Sloan. They call me Sledgehammer. President of Iron Horseman Motorcycle Club, Oklahoma City chapter. Walter knew the name. Everyone in Oklahoma knew the name. Drug trafficking, weapons charges, assault. The newspapers called them a criminal organization. The police called them a gang. Good Christian citizens called them monsters. Now, 123 of those monsters were freezing to death in his parking lot. I'm going to be straight with you, old man. Darrell's eyes met Walter's. Not menace, just exhaustion, and beneath that, fear. We got people dying out here, 7 with frostbite bad enough they might lose fingers. 1 kid in back has not responded in 20 minutes. We got him breathing but barely. Our van broke down 14 miles back with a pregnant woman inside. Storm is not letting up. Every shelter in 50 miles is closed or full. He paused, coughed, spat something dark onto snow. The cops would let us freeze before they would help. We both know that. Walter looked past Darrell at the congregation of frozen figures, men who could break him in half, women with hard eyes, patches and tattoos and scars, but also something else. Human beings, cold, desperate, dying. You let us in, Darrell continued, and I will not lie. It could cost you. People talk. Your congregation finds out you sheltered Iron Horsemen, some might not come back. Bank might decide you are a liability. Cops might give you trouble just for association. He straightened, wincing. But you turn us away, some of my people will not make it till morning. That is not a threat. That is math. Walter Benjamin Crowe had spent 53 years as a minister, baptized babies, buried grandparents, counseled grieving, married hopeful, read the Bible cover to cover more times than he could count, preached sermons about mercy, compassion, the radical hospitality of Christ who ate with tax collectors and touched lepers and never once asked for credentials. In all those years, he had never faced a test like this. He thought about the bank. 72 hours until foreclosure. Letting a motorcycle gang into the church would accelerate that timeline. He thought about the shotgun in the third pew, the note in his pocket, the plan for Easter Sunday. And then he thought about Caroline, about the promise. Keep the faith. Remember that God has a plan. What if this was the plan? What if his last act was not pulling a trigger but opening a door? Walter stepped aside. Get your people inside. All of them. I will start the heat. For a long moment, Darrell did not move. His frozen face processed something unexpected. Acceptance without negotiation, without demands, without hesitation. You understand what you are doing? What this could cost you? Walter almost laughed. Son, I buried my wife 3 years ago, my son 2 years ago, my grandson 8 months ago. The bank is taking this building in 3 days, regardless of what I do tonight. I've got a loaded shotgun in there and a note in my pocket explaining why I will not be around to see April. He met Darrell's eyes. Something passed between them, the shared understanding of men who had stared into the abyss. You are not costing me anything. You might just be giving me a reason to stick around long enough to see what happens next. Darrell Sloan had faced down cops and rivals and men who wanted him dead, never showed weakness, never admitted fear. But standing on that porch, looking at that old man with his quiet voice and empty eyes and incomprehensible offer of shelter, something cracked inside his chest. He turned to face his brothers. Get inside. Everyone inside. Bring Pete first. He needs heat now. The congregation of leather and chrome began to move. Men who could barely walk helped men who could not walk at all. Women who had not cried in years felt tears freezing on their cheeks. One by one, they filed past the old pastor who stood in the doorway like a lighthouse keeper, counting every soul that crossed his threshold. 123 people entered Elkhart Community Church that night. 124, counting the man who had just decided to postpone his date with a shotgun. If you cannot stand how society forgets people like Walter, type "every person matters" in the comments. Let us remind ourselves what is important. The church filled with the sounds of survival, coughing, groaning, the crackle of frozen leather slowly thawing, someone retching in the corner, a reaction to sudden warmth after prolonged cold exposure. Someone else laughing, the slightly hysterical laughter of a person who had accepted death and was now processing the fact that they were still alive. Walter moved through chaos with purpose he had not felt in months. He turned the heating system to maximum, knowing the gas bill would be astronomical, knowing equally well he would never be around to pay it. He opened the storage closet and pulled out every blanket the church owned, 14 in total, most moth-eaten, all inadequate for 123 frozen bodies, but inadequate was better than nothing. Blankets go to worst cases first. His voice cut through noise. Anyone who can stand and walk, you are lowest priority. Anyone who cannot feel fingers or toes, raise your hand. 47 hands went up. Walter felt his stomach drop. 47 people with potential frostbite, 7 severe enough to be identified during the ride. That meant 40 more had been hiding symptoms. Too proud, too stubborn to admit weakness, pride, the curse of strong men everywhere. Walter had seen it kill more people than cancer. You. He pointed at a massive biker with a shaved head and spiderweb tattoo covering his skull. What is your name? The man blinked, not used to being addressed so directly by someone outside the club. They call me 8 Ball. Well, 8 Ball, you look like you can still move. I need you to organize blanket distribution. Worst cases first. Anyone argues, remind them hypothermia does not care about ego. 8 Ball stared for a moment, then grinned, a surprisingly boyish expression on such a terrifying face. Yes, sir, Reverend. He moved off to comply. Walter felt a hand on his shoulder, turned to find Darrell standing behind him, still frozen, still blue-lipped, but with something like wonder in his eyes. You have done this before. Mass casualty triage, Vietnam, Walter replied shortly. Medic, 3 tours. You learn to assess and prioritize when you have 40 wounded and supplies for 10. Darrell nodded slowly. I did 2 tours in Iraq. Different war. Same math. For a moment they stood in silence, 2 old soldiers from different generations, both carrying scars that did not show on the surface. There's a kitchen in back, Walter said. Not much in it, but I have soup stock and canned vegetables, enough to make something hot for maybe 50 people. We have 123. Then we water it down. Hot liquid in stomachs is more important than flavor. He paused. I'm going to need help. Darrell turned and scanned the room. His eyes landed on a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and a patch reading, Road Captain. Marlene. Kitchen duty. Take whoever you need. The woman nodded and began gathering volunteers. Within minutes, the sound of pots clanging joined the symphony of survival. Walter was heading back to the storage closet when he heard commotion near the altar. A group had gathered in a tight circle, voices sharp with panic. He is not responding. Pete. Pete, stay with us. Someone get the old man. Get the Reverend. Walter pushed through the crowd, found what he feared. Pete Weaver, the 20-year-old who had nearly dumped his bike on the highway, was lying on the floor, skin the color of old paper, lips not blue anymore but purple, eyes half open, seeing nothing. Walter knelt beside him, pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck, pulse there but thready, weak, the kind that preceded death by minutes, not hours. How long was he exposed? 4 hours, maybe 5. The speaker was a young woman, face streaked with frozen tears. He gave his gloves to Maria when hers got wet, said he would be fine, said he had been colder. Of course he had. Young men always thought they would be fine. Young men always lied about mortality, right up until the moment it caught up with them. Walter had seen 100 Pete Weavers in Vietnam, boys who gave rations to friends, boys who refused medical attention because someone else needed it more, boys who died with the word fine still on their lips. Not tonight. I need hot water. His voice calm and commanding, not boiling, just hot. And cloth. Towels, shirts, anything absorbent. We need to raise core temperature gradually. Too fast and we put his heart into shock. People scattered to comply. Darrell appeared beside him. Is he going to make it? Walter did not look up, his hands already working, removing Pete's frozen jacket, his ice-stiff shirt, exposing pale chest beneath. I do not know, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he does. He looked up at Darrell. In that moment, the Reverend's eyes held something that had not been there in months. Purpose, will, fire. I did not survive this long to let a boy die on my floor. Now get me those towels. Darrell Sloan, president of Iron Horsemen, veteran of 2 wars and 1,000 street battles, did not argue. He ran. 3 hours later, Pete Weaver's body temperature had risen 4 degrees. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at Walter with confusion of someone who expected to wake up somewhere else entirely. Where am I? You are in a church. You are safe. You are going to be fine. Pete blinked several times. A church. A weak smile crossed cracked lips. Did not think they let people like me into churches. Walter squeezed his shoulder. Son, this church lets in anyone who needs shelter. Always has, always will. Commotion near the entrance. Voices raised in excitement, not panic. 2 new figures stumbling through the door, supported by several bikers who must have gone back into the storm. One was a young woman, visibly pregnant, face pale but eyes alert. Maria, Deacon's widow. How? Walter asked, rising stiffly, knees screaming in protest. Tommy took a truck. Darrell appeared beside him. Found an old pickup in your lot, hot-wired it, drove back through the storm. Walter processed this. That truck belongs to Hank Morrison. He left it 6 months ago when he moved to Florida. We will pay for it, whatever it is worth. Triple if you want. Walter shook his head. It has not run in 6 months. The fact your man got it started is a minor miracle. Tommy is good with engines. Darrell paused. He is good with a lot of things, car theft being one of them. Despite everything, despite cold and exhaustion and the surreal nature of the entire night, Walter laughed, a real laugh, first one in months. Well, I suppose the Lord works in mysterious ways, even through car thieves. Daryl's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. You're not what I expected, Reverend. Neither are you, Mr. Sloan. If you are holding your breath right now, hit that like button. You are not alone. They stood watching as Maria was guided to a pew and wrapped in blankets. Someone found a cushion for her back, someone else already bringing soup. The Iron Horsemen, these monsters society feared, fussing over a pregnant woman like anxious grandmothers. She is due in 6 weeks, Daryl said quietly. Deacon's baby. He was so excited, used to talk about everything he would teach his kid, how to ride, how to fix an engine, how to stand up for yourself without becoming a bully. His voice cracked. He would have been a good father. What happened to him? Walter asked. If you do not mind. Daryl pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo, showed it to Walter, a young man in marine dress uniform, clean-shaven, proud smile. Nothing like the biker Walter had imagined. He served 4 years, Daryl said, 2 tours in Afghanistan, came home with medals and nightmares, could not hold a job, could not sleep without screaming. The VA put him on a waiting list 18 months long. We found him first. Walter stared at the photo, something nagging at his memory. Your son was a cop, Daryl continued. Oklahoma City, you said. Walter nodded slowly. Deacon got pulled over once, 3 years ago, speeding. Your son was the officer. Walter's breath caught. He let him go with a warning, told him to slow down, that someone was waiting for him to come home safe. Deacon never forgot that, talked about it all the time, said it was the first time a cop ever treated him like a human being. The church suddenly felt smaller. The world suddenly felt like a web of connections too complex to comprehend. Michael always said the badge did not make you better than anyone. Walter's voice barely a whisper. Just gave you more responsibility. Sounds like he understood something most cops never figure out. They stood in silence. A minister's son who showed mercy to a biker who remembered that mercy years later. 2 men who would never meet, connected by a moment of simple human decency. Wrong address, Daryl finally said. SWAT team looking for a meth lab 3 houses down, hit Deacon's place at 3 in the morning. He heard the door crash in, thought it was a home invasion, reached for his phone to call 911. He did not need to finish. Walter understood. 4 rounds, Daryl's voice flat, dead before he hit the floor. No charges filed, no disciplinary action. Just a form letter saying the department regretted the error. Walter thought about Michael, about the thin blue line, about how the same system that took his son had taken Deacon. Different circumstances, same result. Families destroyed, lives erased, bureaucratic regret. I'm sorry, Walter said, the words inadequate but necessary. So am I, for both of us. Maria stirred on the pew, cried out softly. Both men tensed, false alarm, just the baby kicking. She settled back into sleep, hand on her belly, slight smile on her lips despite everything. Walter watched her for a moment, then reached up and unclasped the small silver cross from around his neck, the one Caroline had given him on their wedding day, the one he had worn for 51 years. He walked over and placed it gently beside Maria's sleeping form. Daryl watched, said nothing, but something shifted in his eyes. Walter turned back to find Daryl typing on his phone. What are you doing? Making calls, Reverend. Daryl looked up. By Easter, you will understand. Walter did not ask more. He was too tired, too overwhelmed, too busy processing a night that had shattered every assumption he had ever made about the world. Outside, the storm was finally dying. Gray light crept through stained glass windows. The worst was over. Or so Walter thought. The bikers began to stir as sunlight filled the church. Men who had collapsed in exhausted heaps now stretched and groaned and searched for coffee that did not exist. The kitchen had been stripped bare, every can opened, every pot of soup consumed, every scrap of bread distributed. Walter surveyed empty cabinets with something approaching wonder. He had been rationing those supplies for months. Now they were gone. No regret, only satisfaction. They had been used for their intended purpose. They had kept people alive. Reverend, he turned. Darrell standing in the kitchen doorway, different in morning light, still hard, still weathered, but somehow more human. Mr. Sloan, Darrell, or Sledgehammer, whichever you prefer. He stepped into the kitchen. We need to talk about what happened here. Walter felt his stomach tighten. Here it came, the negotiation, the expectation of payment or favor or silence. But Darrell reached into his jacket and pulled out a bundle of cash, crumpled bills, 5s, 10s, 20s, some still damp from snow. He set it on the counter. $812, everything we have, combined. Passed a hat this morning. Everyone gave what they could. Walter stared at the money. I did not ask for payment. I know you did not. That is why we are giving it. Darrell's jaw tightened. Where I come from, debts matter. You save a man's life, you owe him. Not because he asks, because that is how the world stays balanced. I am not sure the world has been balanced for some time. No, it has not. Darrell pushed the money toward him. But that does not mean we stop trying. Walter picked up the bundle. $812, nothing against $280,000, everything against an empty pantry. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. This is not over. What you did tonight, you do not understand what it means to us. You do not understand the world we come from. Then, help me understand. The Iron Horsemen have existed for 47 years, started in '67 by Vietnam vets who came home and found their country did not want them anymore, could not hold jobs, could not rent apartments, could not get anyone to see them as anything other than baby killers and broken men. Walter nodded. He remembered those years. He had been one of those men, lucky enough to find the church before the streets found him. So they built their own family. Darrell continued. Their own rules, their own code. Some of those rules put them on wrong side of the law. I am not going to pretend we are saints, but we have also done things nobody else would do, like riding 700 miles to bury a brother who died wrong, like making sure his pregnant widow gets where she needs to go, even through a storm trying to kill us. He paused, like remembering that the world forgot us and swearing we would never forget each other. Walter thought about his empty church, his congregation of 8, the community that had slowly abandoned this building as the town withered. I understand more than you think. Darrell studied him. When is your deadline? With the bank. 72 hours. Well, 68 now. They are calling the full loan, $280,000. Why the acceleration? Walter laughed bitterly. Because I have been late on payments for 6 months, because the congregation cannot support the building anymore, because this town is dying and they want their money before there is nothing left. And if you do not pay, auction. They sell to whoever bids highest. Probably some developer who will tear it down for condos nobody will buy. Darrell nodded slowly, then stood. I need to make some calls. The sound of motorcycles starting filled the morning air. One by one, the Iron Horsemen prepared to leave. They shook Walter's hand as they filed out. 123 handshakes, 123 variations of thank you and God bless and we will not forget. Darrell was last. He gripped Walter's hand firmly. Iron Horsemen do not forget Reverend Crow. We are going to find a way to pay this debt. I do not know how yet, but it is going to happen. Walter smiled sadly. I appreciate the sentiment, but $280,000 does not appear out of thin air. Darrell grinned, first real smile Walter had seen from him. You would be surprised, Reverend. When enough people care about something, when enough people feel the same debt, miracles happen. He mounted his bike, revved the engine, then paused. By the way, that phone call I made earlier. I was not just calling my chapter. How many chapters do you have? 15 states, and every president now knows your name. The motorcycle roared. Darrell Sloan disappeared down the road, leading his brothers home. Walter stood alone on the church steps, watching until the last engine faded to silence. Then his phone rang. Reverend Crow, this is Marcus Webb from First National Bank of Elkhart. We need to discuss your account. Walter's stomach dropped. We have received an unusual amount of attention regarding your situation. The Webb's voice dripped condescension. Our corporate office has been fielding calls all morning from, shall we say, concerned citizens. I apologize for any inconvenience. That is not why I am calling." A pause. "I've been instructed to inform you that we are extending your deadline, 1 week until the following Sunday." Walter blinked. "You are extending it. Why?" "Frankly, Reverend, because the publicity is becoming a problem. We are being portrayed as villains, the heartless bank foreclosing on the pastor who saved the bikers. That is not good for business." Walter understood immediately. They were not showing mercy. They were managing optics. They expected the story to die down. Then they would proceed quietly. But a week was a week. 7 more days. The amount owed has not changed. Webb continued, $280,000. If you cannot produce it, the auction proceeds regardless of how many news crews show up. The line went dead. Walter looked at the $812 in his hand, looked at the empty church behind him, looked at the sky where 123 motorcycles had disappeared. 1 more week. What could possibly change in 1 more week? His phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. "Reverend Crow, this is Darrell Sloan. Check your email. Something is happening. If you believe this man deserves a miracle after everything he has been through, type Pastor Crow deserves hope in the comments. Show him some love." Walter did not have email on his phone. He was 76 years old and barely understood how text messages worked. So he shuffled to his ancient desktop computer in the back office and waited the usual 3 minutes for it to boot up. The machine wheezed and groaned like an old man climbing stairs. Walter could relate. When his inbox finally loaded, he saw the number and thought the computer had malfunctioned. 147 new messages. He blinked. Refreshed the page. The number changed. 152. Subject lines blurred together as he scrolled. Donation from San Diego chapter. Brothers in Texas want to help. Michigan sends support. Florida chapter standing by. Arizona riders with you. Nevada club heard the story. He opened the first one, from someone named Robert Ironside Patterson, president of Iron Horseman San Diego chapter, Reverend Crow. "Sledgehammer told us what you did. We have taken up a collection, $7,200, more coming. Wire transfer information attached. The brothers do not forget." Walter's hands began to shake. He opened the second email. Arizona chapter, $4,800. The third, New Mexico, $3,200. The fourth, Colorado, $6,100. He stopped counting after the 20th email. His vision was blurring, not from age. From tears he had not shed in months. The Iron Horsemen, spread across 15 states, were mobilizing. Every chapter Darrell had called was now calling other chapters. The network was expanding exponentially, each node producing money. Past hats, emptied savings accounts, IOUs called in, favors traded for cash. But it was not just the Iron Horsemen. The viral video had spread beyond the biker community. Diego Pixel Reyes, the young horseman who had filmed Walter covering Maria with his coat, had uploaded it to Facebook the morning after the storm. 37 seconds of shaky footage. An old pastor moving through rows of sleeping bikers, checking pulses, adjusting blankets, giving away his own coat to a pregnant woman. The caption read, "This man saved 123 lives tonight. The bank is taking his church in 3 days. His name is Reverend Walter Crow, Elkhart, Oklahoma. Remember it. By noon that first day, 12,000 views. By sunset, 400,000. By the time Walter checked his email 3 days later, the video had been shared over 2 million times. And it had reached other clubs. Clubs with no affiliation to the Horsemen. Clubs that were sometimes rivals, sometimes enemies. An email from Road Warriors of Memphis. "We do not ride with the Horsemen, but we stand with the pastor. $8,000 incoming." An email from Desert Kings of Phoenix. "Heard about Elkhart. Respect. 12,000 on the way." An email from a club Walter had never heard of, somewhere in Montana. The old man opened his door. "We are opening our wallets. 6,000. 40 different motorcycle clubs, 40 groups of people who lived outside the law, outside respectable society, outside the categories that most Americans used to define good and bad, all sending money to save a church." The phone rang. Walter grabbed it without thinking. Reverend Crow. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 4 News in Oklahoma City. We have seen the video and we would love to do a story about what happened. Would you be available for an interview? Walter tried to process this. An hour ago, he had been a forgotten old man in a forgotten town waiting to lose everything. Now reporters were calling. I appreciate the interest, he said carefully, but I'm not sure this is really a story. I just opened my door. Anyone would have done the same. Silence on the other end. Reverend Crow, Jennifer Walsh said gently. That is exactly why it is a story, because most people would not have done the same, and everyone knows it. The interview aired 2 days later. Walter sat in his empty church while a camera crew transformed the space with lights and cables. Jennifer Walsh turned out to be a young woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and questions he had not expected. Not about the biker's criminal history, not about the church's financial troubles, about the moment of decision, about what went through his mind when he saw 123 frozen people in his parking lot. I thought about my wife, Walter said, surprising himself with honesty. Caroline always said that faith is not what you believe on Sunday morning. It is what you do on Tuesday night when nobody is watching. And what did faith tell you to do? Faith told me to open the door. The segment ran 4 minutes and 37 seconds, an eternity in local news. It included portions of Diego's original video, interviews with townspeople who expressed shock that those biker types had been anywhere near their community, and a closing shot of Walter standing in front of his church, the bank's for sale sign visible in the background. Within an hour of broadcast, the church phone was ringing constantly. Donations flooded in, small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there. A retired teacher in Tulsa sent $200 with a note that said, "My husband was a Vietnam vet too. Thank you for remembering that everyone deserves shelter." By Friday morning, $12,000 from individual donors. Combined with the biker clubs, the total had reached $93,000. Still not enough, not even close, but the number kept climbing. Walter sat in his office surrounded by letters and checks and messages of support. People cared, people wanted to help. But 93,000 against 280,000. Caring was not enough to move the machinery of finance. His phone buzzed. Another text from Daryl. "Stop checking the numbers, Reverend. We are not done yet. Trust the process." "What process?" "You will see. Just hold on until Easter." Walter stared at the message. Easter was still 4 days away. The bank deadline was Easter Sunday at midnight. What was Daryl planning? Whatever it was, Walter had no choice but to wait and hope and trust that somehow, impossibly, the math would work out. He looked at the shotgun, still locked in the storage closet where he had put it the night of the storm. He had not thought about it in days. That, more than anything, told him something had changed. If this story is giving you chills, hit that subscribe button. We are just getting started. The emails kept coming. By Saturday morning, $187,000 had been pledged or transferred. By Saturday night, $212,000. By Sunday, Easter Eve, $261,000. Close, so close, but still 19,000 short. Walter could not sleep. He sat in the church sanctuary, lights off, watching moonlight filter through stained glass. The faces of saints looked down at him. Mary, Joseph, Jesus on the cross. "What do you want from me?" he whispered to the empty room. "What am I supposed to learn from this?" No answer. There never was. His phone buzzed. Daryl again. "Stop worrying. Check your email one more time." Walter walked to his computer, opened his inbox. One new message. Subject line, "Final count, Reverend Crow. This is Sledgehammer. As of 11:59 p.m. Saturday night, 47 motorcycle clubs across 47 states have contributed to your church fund. Final total, $347,216. Walter read the number 3 times, then read it again. 347,000. 67,000 more than he needed. The email continued. The extra is not a mistake. Brothers voted unanimously. 67,000 goes to rebuild what needs rebuilding. New heating system, new roof if you need it. Whatever keeps that door open for the next person who needs shelter. Also, you should know, we are coming. Walter stared at those last 4 words. We are coming. What did that mean? He found out at 4:15 Easter morning. He woke to a sound, distant at first, so faint he thought it was wind or dream, or his aging ears playing tricks. But it grew, steadily. A rumble vibrating through floorboards, a thunder coming from everywhere at once. Engines, not dozens this time, thousands. Walter rose from his cot and walked to the front door. His joints screamed. He barely noticed. The sound was filling his skull now, drowning everything else. He opened the door and saw the horizon on fire. Headlights, stretching as far as he could see in every direction, a river of light flowing toward Elkhart from every road, every highway, every dirt path. The first motorcycles reached the parking lot at 4:52. They did not stop there. No room. They spilled onto grass, sidewalks, empty lots. They lined Main Street, which had not seen this much traffic since 1987. They filled the parking lot of the abandoned grocery store, the field behind the elementary school, every square foot within half a mile. Walter stood on the church steps watching in stunned silence as the wave kept coming. A man dismounted from a massive Harley. Even in pre-dawn darkness, Walter recognized the beard, the build, the patch reading President. Darrell Sledgehammer Sloan stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Morning, Reverend?" "Darrell," Walter's voice barely a whisper. "What is this? This is the debt being paid." Darrell climbed the steps, stood beside him, both men facing the endless sea of motorcycles, 47 clubs, 15 states. "We put out the call, and they answered. Every one of them. How many?" Darrell smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his scarred face. "Last count just over 5,000. But they are still coming. 5,000. Walter's mind could not process the number. 5,000 motorcycle riders. In a town with population 412, 5,000 people who had traveled hundreds, some thousands of miles to stand in a church parking lot on Easter Sunday. Why? The question came before he could stop it. The money is already raised. The church is saved. Why come all this way? Darrell was quiet. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Walter had ever heard. "Because it is not about the money, Reverend. It was never about the money." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at edges, creased from too much handling. "You know how many of these men and women have been inside a church in the last 10 years? Almost none. You know why? Because churches do not want us. We show up and people cross the street. We walk through doors and everyone stares. We are the people respectable society pretends do not exist." He unfolded the paper. A printout of Diego's video. The thumbnail showing Walter kneeling on the floor, covering a sleeping biker with his own coat. "But you did not do that. You saw us freezing to death and you did not see criminals. You did not see outlaws. You saw human beings who needed help, and you gave us everything you had." Darrell's voice cracked. "Do you know how rare that is? Do you have any idea what that means to people who have spent their whole lives being told they are worthless?" Walter could not speak. His throat had closed, his eyes burning with tears he had not shed in years. "So yeah," Darrell continued, "we raised the money. But that was not the point. The point was showing you, showing the world, that the people you saved are worth something, that we can do more than take, that when someone treats us with dignity, we remember. And we pay it back." He gestured at the sea of motorcycles. 5,000 brothers and sisters, Reverend, all here to say thank you, all here to attend your Easter service. He paused. "If you will have us." Walter looked out at the crowd, leather jackets and tattoos and scars, faces that would make most people cross the street, men who had killed and women who had stolen and people who had done things polite society refused to acknowledge. But he also saw Maria, visibly pregnant now, being helped off a motorcycle by 2 enormous men treating her like glass. He saw Pete Weaver, the 20-year-old who had nearly died, standing near front with a grin that could power a small city. He saw 8 Ball, the giant with spiderweb tattoo, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked absurdly small in his massive hands. 5,000 stories, 5,000 lives, 5,000 human beings who had chosen to spend Easter morning in a church parking lot in the middle of nowhere. "Daryl," Walter said, voice steady despite tears streaming down his face, "I would be honored to have you. All of you." He turned and walked back into the church, left the door wide open behind him, and one by one, 5,000 bikers began to follow. Type the word miracle in the comments if you believe in what is happening right now. Let the algorithm know this story matters. The Elkhart Community Church had seating for 150 people. By 6 o'clock, every pew was full. By 6:15, people standing along walls. By 6:30, the crowd had spilled out the front door, down the steps into the parking lot. Someone had set up portable speakers so thousands who could not fit inside could still hear. Walter stood at the altar and looked out at the most unlikely congregation ever assembled. Bikers filled pews where elderly widows usually sat. Leather jackets hung from hooks where tweed coats normally rested. Tattoos and scars and patches replaced the usual sea of wrinkled faces and gray hair. The smell of incense mixed with motor oil and sweat, and somehow it felt right. "I had a sermon prepared," Walter began, voice amplified by hastily installed microphone. "Been working on it for weeks. About resurrection, new beginnings, the promise of Easter morning." He paused. "But I'm going to throw that sermon away, because what I have seen this morning is more powerful than anything I could have written." Silence, inside and out, even among thousands of bikers, not a sound. 6 weeks ago I was ready to die. A sharp intake of breath somewhere in the crowd, not because I was sick, not because I was afraid, because I had lost everyone I loved and could not see a reason to keep going. My wife Caroline, my son Michael, my grandson David. All gone. And this church, the only thing I had left, was about to be taken. His voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. I had a plan. Easter Sunday was going to be my last service. After everyone left, I was going to use the shotgun I kept in the third pew to end my pain. Complete stillness now. 5,000 people holding their breath. And then, on the night of the storm, something happened. 123 frozen, desperate people showed up at my door. People society told me to fear. People my seminary training taught me to avoid. People that by every conventional measure were not worthy of my help. He let the words hang. But when I looked at them, when I really looked, I did not see criminals. I did not see outlaws. I saw human beings. Cold, scared, dying. And I thought about all the sermons I had preached about the Good Samaritan, about loving your neighbor, about opening your door to strangers. He stepped out from behind the altar, walked down the center aisle, speaking as he went. I realized that if I turned those people away, every word I had ever spoken from this pulpit would be a lie. He stopped in front of Daryl. Front pew, Maria beside him. So I let them in. And what happened next changed everything. He turned to face the crowd again. This man told me stories that night, about loss, about grief, about families torn apart by violence and prejudice, and a system that treats some lives as more valuable than others. I realized my pain was not unique, that grief does not check credentials, that loss does not discriminate between preachers and bikers, between saints and sinners. Walter walked slowly back toward the altar. I have spent 53 years telling people about the love of God, about grace, about mercy, about redemption, but it was not until that night, sleeping on a cold floor surrounded by people I had been taught to fear, that I finally understood what those words mean. He faced the congregation. Grace is not something we earn. It is something we give. Mercy is not something we deserve. It is something we offer. And redemption does not come from being perfect. It comes from being present, from showing up, from opening the door when someone knocks, even when you are afraid, even when you are broken, even when you think you have nothing left to give. His eyes swept the room, the pews, the walls, the door, the parking lot beyond. 5,000 of you came here today. You rode hundreds of miles. You left your homes, your families, your lives. You came to this tiny church in this dying town, not because you had to, but because you wanted to say thank you. His voice rose. But I am the one who should be thanking you. Because 6 weeks ago I was ready to give up, and you All of you gave me a reason to keep going. The church was silent. Outside, thousands of bikers stood motionless. I do not know what happens next. I do not know if this church will survive another year or another decade. I do not know if the people of Elkhart will ever accept what happened here today. He smiled. A real smile. The first one reaching his eyes in 3 years. But I know this. For one morning on the holiest day of the year, the doors of this church were open to everyone. Not just the respectable, not just the righteous, everyone. And that is what Easter is supposed to be about. That is what resurrection means. Not just coming back from the dead, but opening yourself to life again, even when life has given you every reason to give up. He raised his hands. So thank you. Thank you for reminding an old man that miracles still happen, that kindness still matters, that the doors of the church should never be closed to anyone who seeks shelter. He paused, looked at Darrell, at Maria, at Pete and 8-Ball, and the thousands of faces he would never learn to name. Now, let us pray. And then the helicopter appeared. A local ABC affiliate had been monitoring police scanners all morning. Reports of thousands of motorcycles converging on tiny Elkhart had triggered curiosity. A news helicopter, originally assigned to cover Easter traffic, had been diverted. The pilot, a 20-year veteran named Chuck Morrison, would later tell reporters he had never seen anything like it. Thousands of motorcycles, a river of chrome flowing into the heart of Oklahoma. At 7:14, just as Walter finished his benediction, someone in the network control room made a decision. They cut away from scheduled Easter programming, switched to live coverage. At 7:23, CNN picked up the feed. By 8 o'clock, the story was leading every major network in the country. Anchors struggled to explain what they were seeing. Thousands of bikers, many from clubs with notorious reputations, standing peacefully in a church parking lot, listening to an elderly pastor preach about grace. The headline that would define the day appeared on CNN at 8:14. 5,000 bikers save pastor who saved them. But Walter knew nothing about this. He was too busy doing something he had not done in 3 years, hugging strangers. One by one, as the congregation filed out, they stopped to embrace him. Bikers who looked like they could kill with bare hands wrapped arms around him like he was their grandfather. Women with hard eyes pressed faces against his shoulder and wept. Young men who had spent entire lives being told they were worthless thanked him for seeing something different. 4 hours. 4 hours of embraces and tears and whispered words that Walter would carry for the rest of his life. And when it was over, when the last motorcycle had rumbled away and the parking lot was empty and the church was quiet again, Walter sat down in the third pew, the same pew where his shotgun had rested 6 weeks ago. He looked at the altar. Well, Carolyn, I think I understand now. He reached into his pocket, felt for the note that had been there for months, the one explaining his planned exit. Gone. He had destroyed it, but in its place was something else. A new piece of paper, folded and creased. Someone had slipped it into his pocket during those 4 hours of embraces. He unfolded it with trembling hands. A drawing. Crude. Obviously done by a child. A church with tall steeple surrounded by hundreds of tiny motorcycles. At the top, in careful crayon letters, "Thank you, Pastor Crow, for Maria's baby, Deacon's baby, the child not yet born, the child who would come into the world in 4 weeks, the child who would grow up knowing the story of the pastor who opened his door." Walter Benjamin Crow had buried his wife, his son, his grandson. He had been ready to follow them into darkness, but instead he had opened a door, and on the other side he had found something he thought he had lost forever. Family. If you are crying right now, hit that like button. You are not alone. If you believe this kind of love should spread, send this video to someone who needs to know that miracles are real. 5 years later, the Elkhart Community Church was still standing. More than standing. Thriving. The original building had been renovated from foundation to steeple. New heating system that actually worked. New roof that did not leak when it rained. New pews replacing the ones that had been worn down by decades of use. Fresh paint on every wall. Stained glass windows restored to their original brilliance. But the building was only part of the transformation. What had once been a dying church in a dying town had become something nobody could have predicted. A beacon, a symbol, a destination for people who had been told their entire lives that they did not belong in houses of worship. Walter stood at the window of his small office, watching the parking lot fill up. It was Easter Sunday again, the fifth one since the night of the storm, and just like every Easter since, the motorcycles were arriving. Not 5,000 this time. That had been a one-time miracle, an explosion of gratitude that could never quite be replicated. But still hundreds, sometimes over 1,000, bikers from across the country who made the pilgrimage to Elkhart every spring to attend the service that had become legendary. The Easter of the open door, they called it. A knock at his office door. Walter turned to see Darrell Sledgehammer Sloan standing in the frame, still wearing leather, still covered in tattoos, still looking like the kind of man mothers warned their children about, but also different, softer around the eyes, gray creeping into his beard. The hardness that had defined him 5 years ago had mellowed into something else. Not weakness, just peace. "Ready, Reverend?" "Almost," Walter smiled, just taking a moment. Darrell walked over and stood beside him at the window. Together they watched the motorcycles roll in, chrome glinting in morning sunlight, engines rumbling like distant thunder. "You know what today is," Darrell said quietly. Walter nodded. He knew. It was the 5th anniversary of the storm, but it was also something else, the dedication ceremony. 6 months after that first Easter, Walter had made a decision. The extra money from the fundraiser, the $67,000 beyond what was needed to save the church, would not go to renovations alone. It would go to a program. He called it the Open Door Initiative, a network of churches across the country, all committed to the same principle that had saved 123 lives on a frozen March night. No questions asked, no credentials required. Anyone in need would find shelter. The idea spread faster than anyone expected. First to other churches in Oklahoma, then to Texas, Kansas, Colorado, then beyond. Pastors who had heard the story reached out, wanting to be part of something larger than themselves. Congregations that had grown complacent found new purpose. By the 2nd anniversary, 47 churches had joined, the same number as the motorcycle clubs that had contributed to the original fundraiser. Walter did not think that was a coincidence. By the 3rd anniversary, 112 churches. By the 4th, 231. And now, on the 5th anniversary, the Open Door Initiative was about to take another step. The bronze plaque had arrived yesterday. Walter had unwrapped it himself, running his fingers over the raised letters, feeling the weight of the words that would soon hang above the church entrance. "The doors of this church do not ask who is knocking." That was what they were dedicating today, not just a plaque, a promise, a commitment cast in bronze that would outlast Walter, outlast Darrell, outlast everyone who remembered the night of the storm. The church doors opened and people began filing in. Bikers and townspeople, old members of the congregation and new ones. Maria walked in with a 4-year-old boy holding her hand. Deacon's son. Named Walter, after the man who had given his mother shelter when she needed it most. Little Walter had his father's eyes and his mother's smile. He did not understand why so many people rode motorcycles to church every Easter. He just knew that the old pastor always had candy in his pocket and that the big man with the beard gave the best piggyback rides. Someday he would understand. Someday Maria would tell him the whole story. About his father who died too young, about the storm that almost killed his mother, about the old man who opened his door and changed everything. But for now, he was just a kid excited about Easter candy. Pete Weaver walked in next, 25 years old now, no longer the boy who had nearly frozen to death on a church floor. He had gotten his life together in the years since, finished his GED, enrolled in community college, was now working toward a degree in social work. He wanted to help people, he said, the way the Reverend had helped him. 8-Ball came in behind Pete, still massive, still covered in tattoos, still carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked comically small in his giant hands. Every Easter he brought flowers for the altar. Never said why, never had to. The church filled quickly. Within 30 minutes, every pew was occupied. People stood along the walls. More gathered outside, where speakers had been set up, just like that first Easter. Walter made his way to the altar. His steps were slower than they used to be. 81 years old now. The body was wearing down in ways that could not be fixed, but his mind was clear, his heart was full, and his voice, when he spoke, still carried the quiet authority that had commanded attention for over 5 decades. "Welcome," he said simply. "Welcome to the Church of the Open Door." A murmur of response from the congregation. "Welcome, Reverend." Walter looked out at the faces before him, so different from the congregation he had known before the storm. That group had been small, elderly, fading. This congregation was alive, young and old, rough and respectable, saints and sinners all mixed together in the same pews, exactly as it should be. 5 years ago tonight, 123 people knocked on the door of this church. They were freezing. They were desperate. They were the kind of people that most churches would have turned away. He paused. I almost did turn them away. For about 3 seconds, I stood at that door and thought about all the reasons I should say no. The danger, the reputation, the mess they would make of my nice, clean pews. A ripple of laughter. The bikers knew the mess had been considerable. But then I thought about something my wife told me many years ago. Caroline said that faith is not what you believe on Sunday morning. It is what you do on Tuesday night when nobody is watching. He smiled at the memory. 5 years later, he could finally think of Caroline without the sharp edge of grief. The pain had softened into something gentler. Gratitude for the years they had shared. Hope that he would see her again someday. So I opened the door, and my life changed forever. He gestured toward the entrance. Today we dedicate a plaque that will hang above that door. A reminder to everyone who comes after us that this church has made a promise that will never be broken, no matter who sits in this pulpit, no matter what happens in the world outside. Darrell rose from his seat in the front pew. He walked to the entrance, where the plaque was covered by a simple cloth. The congregation turned to watch. "The doors of this church," Walter said, his voice carrying through the silence. "Do not ask who is knocking." Darrell pulled the cloth away. The bronze gleamed in the morning light. The words stood out sharp and clear. A promise cast in metal that would outlast them all. "The doors of this church, do not ask who is knocking." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Maria's son, little Walter, broke the silence. "That is pretty," he announced in the loud voice of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned about quiet moments. The church erupted in laughter. The tension broke. And suddenly everyone was applauding, bikers and townspeople alike, all of them celebrating a promise that had been kept for 5 years and would be kept for many more. Walter felt tears on his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them. This, he thought, this is what resurrection looks like. The service continued. Hymns were sung, some by people who had not sung in church for decades. Prayers were offered, stories were shared. The congregation that had gathered in this small Oklahoma church was not united by background or belief, or any of the usual categories that divided people. They were united by something simpler. They had all, at some point in their lives, been the person knocking on the door, and they had all found it open. After the service, Walter stood on the church steps for 3 hours, shaking hands, accepting embraces, listening to stories from people who had traveled hundreds of miles to be here. A woman from Michigan told him that her church had joined the Open Door Initiative last year. They had sheltered 16 homeless families through the winter. A man from Texas said he had been atheist his whole life, but had started attending services after reading about Elkhart. He was not sure he believed in God yet, but he believed in open doors. A teenage girl, shy and quiet, pressed a letter into his hand and ran away before he could read it. Later, in his office, Walter would unfold it and find a story that broke his heart and healed it simultaneously. She had been on the streets for 2 years. She had found shelter at an open-door church in Denver. She had a home now, a job, a future, because somebody opened a door. The afternoon faded into evening. The crowd thinned. The motorcycles departed one by one, engines rumbling into the distance like rolling thunder. Finally, only a handful of people remained. Darrell, Maria, little Walter, asleep on a pew with his thumb in his mouth, Pete and 8-Ball, helping clean up the sanctuary. Walter sat down heavily in the third pew. The same pew where he had once hidden a shotgun. The same pew where he had planned to end his life. That felt like a different person now. A different world. Darrell sat down beside him. Hell of a day, Reverend. Language, Walter said automatically. Darrell grinned. Sorry. Heck of a day. They sat in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have been through something together. Something that words cannot fully capture. You know, Walter said finally, 5 years ago I was sitting in this exact spot. Shotgun across my knees, note in my pocket, ready to be done with everything. I know. I was so sure that my story was over, that there was nothing left worth staying for. He looked at Darrell. I was wrong. Darrell nodded slowly. We all get it wrong sometimes, Reverend. The question is whether we are willing to be corrected. Walter thought about that. About all the times in his life he had been certain about something, only to discover that certainty was just another form of blindness. He had been certain that bikers were dangerous criminals. He had been certain that his church was worthless. He had been certain that his life was over. Wrong. 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 Thank God for being wrong. I need to tell you something, Darrell said quietly. Something I should have told you years ago. Walter waited. That night, the night of the storm, when I knocked on your door, I was not just looking for shelter. What do you mean? Darrell stared at his hands. I was looking for a reason. A reason for what? To keep going. His voice dropped to a whisper. Deacon was not just my brother. He was my son. Not biological. But I raised him from the time he was 15. His parents were gone. The club was all he had. I was all he had. Walter felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. When he died, something broke in me. Same thing that broke in you when you lost your family. I was going through the motions, leading the club, making decisions. But inside, I was already gone. He looked up at Walter. That night, when you opened your door, when you gave us everything you had, when you lay down on that cold floor beside us like we were worth something. His voice cracked. That was the first time in months I felt like maybe the world was not completely broken, like maybe there were still people worth protecting, worth fighting for. Walter reached over and gripped Darrell's hand. We saved each other, he said simply. Yeah. Darrell nodded. Yeah, I guess we did. They sat together until the sun went down. Two old men who had found each other at the edge of oblivion, two lives that had been headed for darkness until a door opened and let the light in. Eventually, Maria came to collect little Walter. The boy woke just long enough to give the Reverend a sleepy hug before being carried out to the car. Pete and 8-Ball finished cleaning and said their goodbyes. The church fell quiet. Darrell stood to leave, then paused at the door. Same time next year, Reverend. It was not a question. Same time next year. Walter agreed. Darrell nodded and walked out into the night. Walter sat alone in the empty church. The bronze plaque gleamed above the entrance. The stained glass windows glowed faintly in the last light of day. He thought about Caroline, about Michael, about David. He thought about all the people he had lost and all the people he had found. He thought about doors, the ones we close out of fear, the ones we open out of faith, the ones that change everything when we finally find the courage to walk through them. Reverend Walter Benjamin Crow died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later. He was 81 years old. He went to bed on a Tuesday night after a long day of visiting sick parishioners and woke up somewhere else entirely. Darrell Sledgehammer Sloan was holding his hand when he passed. His last words, spoken in the final moments before his eyes closed for the last time, were simple. The door stays open. Promise me. Darrell promised, and he kept that promise. The Elkhart Community Church still stands today. The bronze plaque still hangs above the entrance. Every Easter, hundreds of motorcycles still fill the parking lot, pilgrims coming to pay tribute to a man who saw human beings when everyone else saw monsters. The Open Door Initiative has grown to over 500 churches across North America. Thousands of people have found shelter, food, safety, hope, all because one 76-year-old pastor decided to open his door on a frozen March night. The shotgun that Walter once kept in the third pew was melted down and recast. It is now a small bronze cross that hangs behind the altar, a reminder that the same hands that once contemplated destruction can also create something beautiful. Maria's son, Walter Jr., is 9 years old now. He knows the whole story. He knows about his father who died too young. He knows about the storm and the bikers and the pastor who changed everything. Every Easter, he stands at the church door and hands out programs to arriving visitors. "Welcome to the Church of the Open Door," he says, with a smile exactly like his mother's. "Come on in." Some stories end with death, some with victory, some with a lesson learned or a battle won. This one ends where it began, with an open door, and the promise that it will stay that way forever. This story proves that the smallest act of kindness can change everything. If you believe that people like Walter and Daryl deserve recognition, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I hunt for stories like this to remind you that humanity is still beautiful. Type, "Thank you, Pastor Crow," in the comments if this story touched your heart. And if you know someone who is struggling, someone who feels invisible, share this video with them. Let them know they matter. Let them know their story is not over. The door is always open. All you have to do is knock. The end.